Mute. There we go. Thank you. Well, I'm giving you the week off this week, Tonya. Okay. My mother always told me I shouldn't volunteer, but here I am volunteering. So let's see how we go. Yeah, is traditional forecasting and demand management still relevant in our new normal, Agile and VUCA world? Well, let's see. I am reusing some slides that from a workshop that I've run for the last 20 years. So please, please ignore my blue period. If I remember my art history, Pablo Picasso's blue period was between 1901 to 1904. My blue period was between 2001 and 2004, 100 years later. So I do apologize, we've got some blue slides with white writing on. But what are we going to talk about today? I want to talk about traditional demand management. Let's talk about forecasting. We'll talk about consensus demand management process, because forecasting is really just the very first part of what I call a consensus demand management process, which you need to be putting in your business. And I find a lot of companies are not very good at forecasting or at demand management. It's one of those things that I've spent a lot of time with a lot of clients working on, because they just really don't do it properly. And then we'll talk about statistical forecasting and using proper forecasting tools, because most people just use a spreadsheet, and that's absolutely hopeless. And then I'll talk about forecasting in our new VUCA demand-driven world. I put this together, as I say, about 20 years ago, but I've always said demand management has three aspects to it. In the middle there, we've got the known. Let me get my, if I can get my laser pointer going here. It doesn't want to start. But in the middle here, we've got the known, which is basically our customer orders. Where are we? The laser pointer, there we go. Okay, so in the middle here, I don't know, why have I got two? That's interesting. Does I get 2 pointers? Let's see if I can get rid of one of them. I don't know. Now I've got nothing. Oh, this is not going very well, is it? Oh, all right, now I've got one. Okay, right, so in the middle here, we've got what I call the known, which is actual customer orders. So we know exactly what the customer wants, what product he wants, how many he wants, and when he actually needs it. So that's really great. And if we've got a lot of those going out into the future, that's fantastic. But most of us don't. We have some orders today or for the next couple of days, and that's probably about it. Then we've got the unknown, what I call the unknown. And now this is where we use our quantitative forecasting methodologies. So this is the current customers and current products. So we're taking our sales history and we're putting it through a statistical forecasting system and coming up with a forecast into the future. But we know the future is not a direct representation of the past. And so we need to do some form of collaboration, find out what we think is going to change or what we know is going to change, and then we can come up with the collaborated forecast. Okay, and then we can start moving into consensus forecasting. I'll talk more about that later. But then on the right-hand side here, I've got what I call the really unknown stuff. This is potential customers, potential new products, quotations we might have out there, market information that might be coming into us. There could be a lot of things that affect our markets, affect our sales. And there are things like Forex rate or the interest rate or the oil price or the weather or car sales, et cetera, et cetera. There's 1,000,001 things that can affect our sales. So this is where we use the qualitative forecasting techniques. And what we do is we take the known, the unknown, and the really unknown, and we come up with a consensus forecast. Now, I call it a consensus because I want it to be a consensus of all those people in the organization that understand our business. We want to come up with one set of numbers that everybody has consensus on. Of course, then that number then goes down to my master scheduler, and then we start doing the planning traditionally. So if we look at the way we do traditional planning, planning hierarchy here, and I usually split it down the middle here. So on the left hand side we have the demand side of the business, okay? And on the right-hand side here, we have the supply side of the business. This would be a manufacturing operation, of course. And if we don't have a reasonable idea of what's happening on the left-hand side here, how on earth can the guys on the right-hand side who are organizing the supply understand what it is they should be supplying? And of course, we understand that we have 3 levels of planning and 1 level of execution. So what I always tell people is you should be spending 75% of your time up here and 25% of your time down here. What tends to happen is, though, that the planning is very bad. We do about 10% planning and about 90% expediting, running around like chickens without heads, trying to get something out the door this morning that we didn't realize was a problem. So we have this demand management process over here that we're going to be talking about, and it provides information to 3 levels of planning. It provides in total to strategic planning, in aggregate to sales and operations planning, and traditionally in detail down to the master production and scheduling. So what about forecasts? Well, there's 3 things we know about forecasts. They're always going to be wrong, always will be. I never see a point. The only way we're going to get an accurate forecast is if we can time travel. Personally, I've never seen anybody from the past or the future, so I assume that is not going to be available to us. Forecasts are more accurate for groups of items. So as I start aggregating items up into groups, they can become more and more accurate. And then forecasts are more accurate the closer they are to the current period, of course. So it's very easy to forecast the weather for tomorrow, but what's the weather going to be like on Christmas Day? We'd have to go back and look at some statistics and try and work that out. So another thing with forecasts is that it should never be a single figure. We often have a single figure for a forecast, but it needs to have confidence limits. How confident am I in that forecast? If the salesman tells me he's going to sell 100, we know for sure he's not going to sell 100. He's going to sell either less than 100 or he's going to sell more than 100. But is he going to sell between 80 and 120, or maybe between 50 and 150? We need to have some confidence in that forecast. So it could be a figure plus and minus an expected error, or it could be a minimum and a maximum figure. So we need to have the feeling for that forecast. And how do we use it? Well, traditionally, we've used a long-range forecast for strategic planning. And as I said, typically that's going to be in totals, probably tons or linear meters or hectoliters or whatever it might be that you produce. Medium range for sales and operations planning, and that's going to be an aggregate, generally product families based around the plant that you have to manufacture your products. And then on the short range, we're looking at master production scheduling, and that would be in detail in finished product detail. Now, a lot of people, as I said, tend to use a spreadsheet for their forecasting, and I cannot for the life of me understand why, because it's absolutely terrible. If I'm using a spreadsheet with a moving average, 3-month moving average, here's my sales history. You can see that, well, there's probably a little bit of trend here. There's definitely some seasonality. And if I'm using a spreadsheet with a 3-month moving average, there's my forecast. Okay, and that's the confidence in the forecast as we go out into the future. Absolutely hopeless. And why people do not go and get themselves a statistical forecasting tool, with the press of a button, you can forecast thousands of items in a matter of almost seconds. I can't believe how quickly it does these things. So taking that item we saw earlier, we can now get a reasonably looking forecast. And we can see the blue line here is actually the confidence in that forecast. So we have a lot more confidence in that forecast. So if you are using spreadsheets, go out and get yourself a decent statistical forecasting tool. So we've now got a forecast, but that's just the very beginning of the process, in my opinion. We need to set up this demand management process. In fact, I call it a consensus demand management process. Okay, forecasting is too important to leave in the hands of the salesman, and often this happens in a business. we ask the salesman to go out and make a forecast for what he's going to sell. And when he gets it wrong, we slap him on the wrist and say, oh, bad boy, you got the forecast wrong again. Well, he's always going to get it wrong. And I mean, at the end of the day, they get fed up with it. And then they say, well, look, I'm not interested in forecasting because I always get it wrong. And I'm always getting a slap on the wrist. And generally, the salesmen don't have the time to devote and often don't have the understanding really to go through the forecasting process. However, at the end of the day, the sales and marketing need to own that forecast. They need to agree that that forecast is something that they can achieve out there. So what are the objectives and outputs? What are we trying to achieve with this demand management process? Well, we need to provide the business with a reasonable demand plan. And I like that word reasonable, okay? It's never going to be accurate, but we want something that's fairly reasonable with which we can drive the business's planning systems. And this will enable the company to better plan investment strategies into the future, plan new resources and plant and equipment into the future, procurement of materials timeously as well. But how far do these plans need to go out? Well, a demand plan for strategic planning probably needs to go out to 3 or 5 years. I think in the old days, people were strategically planning out 10 years, but unless you're an ESCOM or an oil refinery, probably you're not going to be doing that because there's so many things happening in the world that if you strategically plan out 10 years, it's basically something's going to change during that period. So 3 to 5 years seems to be the sort of fairly norm for most manufacturing companies. And remember that demand plans in totals could be in monetary terms, could be in tons, could be in hectoliters, depending on what it is that you produce. Sales and operations planning, and here we plan in product families. As I've said, these product families revolve around the resources that you have in the plant and not necessarily marketing product families. Here we need to go out probably about 18 months to 2 years. The whole objective here in sales and operations planning, in my mind, is to determine when do we need to significantly change our capacity. And I need about 18 months to 2 years to achieve that, because if I realize now that in 18 months time I'm going to run out of capacity, I need to start planning that today. I need to get that onto the budget this year so I can spend the money next year and put that new equipment in the factory. So we need to go to about 2 years in product families or in some sort of aggregate. And then master scheduling needs to be in detail, and this is finished product detail, probably going out 4 to 6 months. In fact, it's the cumulative lead time plus a little bit. If we have 3 to 4 months lead times on our raw materials, we need to know today what it is we're going to be, or what we think we're going to be building in 4 or 5 months time, because today I've actually got to order those raw materials. So most master schedules would probably have gone out to 4 to 6 months. Now, the important thing is that these 3 plans need to be derived from the same data. They need to support each other, and they need to be a consensus of those with insight in our business as well. So they cannot be developed independently by different groups or teams. So you can't have one team doing a forecast for strategy and another one for sales and operations planning and the master scheduler doing his own thing. You need to have a group of people that come together and produce these 3 plans. So it needs to be not what one person or one group thinks, but what's going to happen about what's going to happen into the future. So when the demand plan is proved wrong, which it will be, we don't blame the person or the group. We ask why. We blame the process, okay? We all too often blame the person. We need to blame the process. We need to ask ourselves a question: why didn't we see that demand coming? And then file it away in our knowledge bank and change the process to improve the accuracy of the forecast. And I think the weather forecasters give us a good analogy here, really, because our atmosphere is continuously changing and they have to keep changing their models as things happen. Oh, we didn't see that storm coming, or we didn't see this happening. How can we make sure that we see that in the future? So we need to put that into our process. So we need to develop this consensus demand management process so we can gain a reasonable grasp of the demand on our business. So we need to have a demand team which meets on a monthly basis. We need a demand manager. I believe any company of a reasonable size should have a demand manager, and they should also have a supply manager. And in the traditional way of doing things, that would have been the master production scheduler, would have been the supply manager, and the demand manager works on the left-hand side of the business, as we saw earlier, in sales and marketing. And their job is to come up with these demand plans, or at least drive the process. And we should have marketing managers there. We need the sales managers there. If we have her, he should be there, or she should be there. And anybody else who has insight in what drives the demand on the business. I was working with a company that manufactured cardboard boxes for basically the agricultural industry. And we were setting up the demand management process, the demand management team. And I said, you guys understand how to make boxes, but do you understand anything about the apple crops, the grapes, the oranges, the citrus? What do we know about that business? Don't we need to factor that into the demand plan? Are the harvests going to be better this year or worse? Are we going to be making more boxes or less boxes? So maybe we need someone on the team that has that insight. Maybe we need to hire somebody on a regular basis to come in and give us that information such that we can add that into our demand plans. So the process, and I'll show it on the diagram just now, but first of all, we start with a quantitative statistical forecasts. We then go and collaborate with those forecasts with our customers. We do a qualitative forecasting process, and then we can create the demand plans for strategy, sales and operations planning, and master scheduling. So it looks a little bit like this. We've got several people involved here. We've got sales and marketing. We've got the customer, we've got sales and marketing, the demand manager, the demand team, the directors, the top management, and master production scheduler, traditionally. So the first thing that happens is that the demand manager should manage or maintain the actual demand file. So initially, we basically take out the sales history from our system. Now, we shouldn't be forecasting on sales. We should be forecasting on demand, and the two can be different, okay? What we sold and what was demanded from us can be, well, not totally different, but can be different. Let's say, for example, a customer comes to you and says, I need 100 in January. And you say, oh, okay, we can give you 50 in January. What happens if we give you the other 50 in February? And the customer might say, well, okay, not ideal, but I'll accept it. So we ship the 50 in January, but we let him down in February, and we only ship the other 50 in March. So when I look at the sales history, it says, oh, 50, nothing, 50. It looks like there's a pattern developing here, 50 every other month. But the true demand was 100. And there are many, many other cases where the sales history is not actually what was demanded. So ideally, part of the demand manager's job is to try and create that demand file, download the sales history, and massage it into a demand file. Sometimes we have zero sales. Why did we have zero sales? Well, we had no stock. Oh, well, do you want to have zero sales at the same time next year? Well, no, not really. So what do we think the actual demand was in that period? We need to put that into the demand file. So this is quite a difficult process, and one that needs to be managed quite well. So then we take that demand file, not the sales history, the demand history, and we generate a statistical forecast. Put it through your tool, your statistical tool. It will then look, using expert selection, it will find the best algorithm for that particular data. This should then be passed on to your sales and marketing team, who need to collaborate. Then if necessary, go down and talk to the customers, collaborate with the customers. Say, Mr. Customer, this is what the system is telling me. What do you know that I don't know? How can I modify that forecast? So we update the statistical forecast, and then we can collate all the forecasts from the various regions and sales managers and salesmen. We then move into the monthly demand where we receive these updated forecasts. So the demand team looks at them. They go into this qualitative process, if you remember, looking at potential new customers, new products, looking at the bigger picture as far as Forex rates are concerned, or oil price, or car sales, or whatever it might be. And then they can generate those 3 consensus demand plans. And in total going to strategy, so the directors can grab that strategy forecast whenever they might need it, or demand plan. Top management once a month would be doing sales and operations planning, so they would take that one. And then we would have the master scheduler taking the detailed plan. So that's traditionally what we would be doing. So how do we use forecasting in our new normal demand-driven VUCA world? Well, we don't use a forecast to develop a master schedule. We don't have a master production schedule. Most companies have lost their master production schedule. A very rare manufacturing company that has a master production scheduler. And they drive their planning systems on forecasts and orders, which is totally incorrect. But that's another story. So we don't use our forecast to create that master schedule. We also don't use a forecast to determine what needs to be manufactured or made today, or what needs to be shipped out to our distribution centers today, or what do we need to buy from our suppliers today. We're not going to use a forecast to do that. In a demand-driven world, we do use forecasts. Now, a lot of people think that if you're going to be moving into a demand-driven world, you're not going to use forecasts at all. Absolutely not true. You're still going to be using forecasts. In some cases, we use a forward-looking average daily usage, or an FDU, or we might use a blended ADU, and I'll talk more about these and why we use them just now. We also use the forecast to project the operating model forward to determine potential resource constraints. So forecasting in a demand-driven world is as equally, if not more important than in a traditional world that we've been using before. So DDMOP buffers are constructed using an average daily usage, an ADU. Typically this it takes the past history, actual demand history, over an agreed period and then computes an average daily usage. So why do we sometimes use a forward daily usage? When I first started with DDMOP, we only used ADUs, but DDMOP is a living organism. It's growing, it's developing as we go forward. And some people started saying, well, maybe we need a forecasted daily usage. Why might we do that? Well, what happens if you've got a new product? There's no history. So we're going to have to use some sort of forecast to determine what the daily usage might be. In some cases, once we get going, we might then move into a blended ADU where a portion of the ADU calculation would be looking forward with the forecasts and some of it would be looking back at the history. This FDU has been exceptionally useful recently with this pandemic because a lot of products, the demand for them has just dropped off totally. And if we go back and have a look, the demand has been extremely low. And so we're now using a forecasted ADU to try and work out what's going to happen in the future. So basically, there's been three types of products, I think, that have happened over the pandemic. We've had those products that have actually increased tremendously. I mean, things like sanitizer and masks, if you went back and had a look at the ADU in the past, very little. But now, huge growth in those markets. So we would have to use an FDU in those cases. The products that have just tootled along exactly the same, I guess things like bread and milk, people are still eating the same amount of bread and drinking the same amount of milk. So that's not going to change much. And then there are other cases where we might be looking at putting in a blended ADU because there has been some change in the way that the products are, or in fact, the demand for the products have dropped off totally. So we have these uses for these FTUs and the blends, and often we change it. And instead of using initially when we started DDMLP, we started using demand adjustment factors, in other words, seasonality, to boost the buffers up and down. But if we use a forecasted or a blended ADU, sometimes it'll pick up that seasonality and adjust the buffers. As we can see at the bottom here, how the buffers are adjusting because the demand is changing out in the marketplace. The other thing I've said is that we use the forecast, take the operating model and project it out into the future. And this is what we would call a buffer trend report here. So we're sitting here on the left-hand side here. And probably we've just started with our DDMLP implementation. So if you see, we're about half the buffers, the on-hand balance is sitting in the blue here. We've got too much stock, okay? This black line here is the ADU projected out into the future using the forecast. So you can see in the near future, there's going to be a slight drop off here, but there's going to be an increase in demand going out into the future here. And the purple line here is basically the projection of the actual on-hand balance. So at the moment, our on-hand balance is well above where our average inventory should be, okay? And over a period of time, we're whittling that down. We're getting less and less items in the blue, and we're getting our actual inventory tracking fairly well the average inventory that should be. And at the end of, I think this is about 3 or 4 months here, if we follow the methodology correctly, all our items should be in the green. Nothing's overstocked, and our inventory is more or less tracking where our average inventory should be. So we can see into the future how the system is going to be working for us. So using that forecast. But we can also use it to look at rough cut capacity planning as well on our resources. So here we've got a bottling plant here. There's our capacity. And we can see as we go out into the future, using the forecast and the methodology on the buffers, we can determine when each of those SKUs is going to be replenished or should be replenished. And then we can put that into a rough cut capacity planning load graph here, and we can see whether we're going to have any situations in the future where we have limited capacity and we've got a capacity problem. But on the other hand, we can also see we've got excess capacity down here. Maybe in this period here, we could sell that capacity or do something else with it. So it's giving us an indication of our capacity requirements into the future as well. Now, this, I think, is absolutely key here, because if you look at, we've got a 12-month period going forward here. Forecast, as I said, a forecast should never be a single number. So there's my average forecast going into the future. So we see the demand growing, but we know we have a certain amount of confidence in that forecast. So we're saying could be as high as here, or it might be as low as down here, but let's take an average number and drive the system. Now that's what we've done traditionally, driven our system with an average number, all right? But now, and we put that into the master schedule and drive the master schedule. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that projected ADU and put it into master settings for our demand-driven system, okay? Using those master settings, we're going to set up a buffer for this particular item, all right? Now we know that the buffer is basically set on that ADU. So as the projected ADU increases as we go forward in time, the buffer is going to increase as well. But the beauty of this is that we have this capability range. So what's happening when we reconcile the capability range here is that we know that the forecast could be as high as this, or it could be as low as that. Here we've got the maximum inventory exposure. So say, for example, the forecast comes down on the conservative side here. It means that our maximum inventory exposure is only going to be this high, not any higher than that. But if the demand does go up, and we are on the optimistic side here, then we have this maximum upside limit here. And we can look at this range here and reconcile it with this range here. And if we feel that this range is too small or too large, we can go and change the master settings for our buffers, maybe change the buffer profile in some way. So our capability range is mapped and in line with the forecasting range here. If the forecasting range is a lot smaller, then my buffer could be a lot smaller. If the range is a lot bigger, then my buffers are going to have to be a little bit bigger. Okay, but we're sort of mapping one against the other, which I think is really fantastic. So if the demand is higher, the buffer has safety, and if the demand is lower, stock exposure is limited to a maximum here. All right, and if the range is insufficient, then adjustments can be made, considered for a model through the master settings. So we would change the master settings. So I think this is a very important aspect of how we can take a forecast with an optimistic and a conservative side and actually translate that into our demand-driven buffers. So what's going to happen now? If I go back to my consensus demand management process, it's exactly the same. Nothing changes here. Nothing. Except down the bottom here, instead of taking that detailed demand plan and giving it to the master production scheduler, I'm going to be giving it to the demand-driven sales and operations team for their use. Okay, so this is how we should be working in the future now. Oops. So this is the demand-driven adaptive enterprise. Here's my operating model down here. It's got my buffers in here. There's my model configuration, not master schedule. Model configurations coming down. The master settings are coming down here, and I'm getting variance feedback on a real-time basis. And I'm asking myself the question, how well is my operating model working? Is it stable? Is it reliable? How fast is it working? Remember, DDMLP is all about flow, so we want things to flow quickly. And it's being driven by actual demand, customer orders, okay? And so this is being continuously improved, all right? But this is where our forecasts and demand management come in here in this demand-driven sales and operations planning process. And we use them here to calculate either a forward-looking ADU or a blended ADU. Perhaps we can use it if we want to use those ADUs for our items, but it's also being used for operating model projection. So we take this operating model and taking the forecast and the demand plan, we project it into the future to see where we might have problems. So we have these model projections, innovations and strategic recommendations going back to my adaptive S&OP process, okay, which ultimately is providing a business plan parameters down to this demand-driven sales and operations planning, which then sets the model configurations, etc. And of course, this right-hand side of the program is being driven, is market-driven innovation here. Okay, so that's how we should be working in the future. And is traditional forecasting and consensus demand management still relevant in our normal VUCA world? Absolutely yes. And we need to be doing a better job than we were doing before. So I don't care how good your demand management, your forecasting and demand management is, you need to do it better. Okay, have I still got anybody online here? Oh, we got 17 people. Do we have any questions, Tanya? Or Cindy?
I don't see any questions, but we need to have some, we need to get people having some discussion here.
Discussion, absolutely, yes.
Yes.
How are we doing on timing?
So anybody that wants to challenge what Ken is saying? Whoops.
Everybody's so quiet. Who we got online here? I can't see everybody.
Ken, I have a question.
Yes, sorry. Is that Daniel, is it?
Daniel,
yes.
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 Now, in
yes.
you in your role, in what you do over the years. You deal with many organizations, and I'm looking specifically only at South Africa. And what you advocate here is I'm very much a supporter of that. What is your view in terms of the how can we call it, the vibe in South African supply chain organizations? Are they buying into this? What is the industry? What is your opinion of the industry? Do they support this? Because I look at, obviously it varies from industry to industry, but surely you have a general opinion of what is the vibe out there on what you are saying here.
Yeah, look, Daniel, look, there's always those good companies, but I would say few and far between. And the majority of companies really don't understand a lot of this. I see people called demand managers, supply chain managers. They have no qualifications. They've been sort of put into that position because the boss, I think, needs to know that they have one. I remember many years ago, a guy who'd been on one of my courses phoned me up and he said, "Oh, Ken, I've got a new job." "Oh yeah, that's nice. What is it?" "I'm going to be the logistics manager at this company." I said, "Oh, well, that's fantastic." And then there was a bit of a silence on the phone. And then he said, "What does the logistics manager do?" And I said, "Well, what does your boss think you should be doing?" He says, "Well, he doesn't know. He sees that we should probably have a logistics manager, so he's appointed me, you know." And I mean, this is the type of thing that goes on. I don't think a lot of our top management, you know, necessarily expose themselves to a lot of this stuff. And they've been trying to do what they've been doing for the last 30 years, and they're probably only about 5 years from retirement, and they don't want to rock the boat. And I see that as a problem. So there's a lot that people could do. You know, companies are making money despite themselves. If they just did things properly, they can make a huge amount more money. And I've never really understood that. You know, that people are not actually going out there and doing these things. Forecasting, very badly done in most businesses, very badly done. Two areas I've always worked on quite a lot in: inventory accuracy, trying to get people to put in proper cycle counting programs. I mean, it's not that difficult, and yet they don't do it. And they've got inaccurate inventory, and they don't understand what inaccurate inventory costs them. So I've spent a lot of time with my clients on inventory accuracy and demand management, because without those two things, I mean, you can't run a planning system. So yeah, unfortunately, my opinion is that we don't do a very good job. However, when I go to the States, or when I've been to the States and I talk to the guys over there, they say, you know, "You think we're brilliant, but we're just as bad as you lot over there. We've got a handful of good companies, and the rest really are not doing what they should be doing." So maybe it's not Africa or South Africa. Maybe it's something that happens in the world. So I don't know. Daniel, is that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm actually quite happy with your answer, because I share that opinion. I think your exposure to these things are far greater than mine, and I was just keen on getting a general view. I give you an example. Both myself and my wife, we are in supply chain management. She works she's in charge of the supply chain for a big tobacco company, and they went back to work today. I won't mention the name, but they're in Joburg somewhere, the second biggest one in this country. And the one thing that she moans about when she comes home at night is the forecasting, is the plan, because the boss still believes it has to be done in the way you've just described it. So yeah, I think you've hit it on the nail, and I share very much that opinion. It's not exclusive to South Africa, correctly, but I'm just using South Africa as a point for the discussion. But thanks for that.
I think, Ken, if I can just add something.
Yeah, Dave.
Within, you know, Daniel, you've mentioned a very, very pertinent point there about industry, and something that I've come across is that a lot of senior management, because of a lack of understanding of the capability of traditional MRP systems, they tend to want it to perform in the same way that their system prior to MRP performed. And so they spend huge amounts of time and effort trying to manipulate the ERP system to give them what they previously had, instead of actually changing their mindset and changing their approach to suit the ERP system. And it would then become far more reliable and a far better source of information going forward. But yeah, it's a funny thing that people do with the ERP and with the information. And it just depends on your leader within the organization.
Yeah, Dave, if I can just, sorry, Ken, if I can just respond, it's exactly what you've just said. In the example that I used, and I mean, I see that in my house because we talk about the bloody topic. If there's one topic we speak about every single night, is exactly that. And it's absolutely, they manipulate the MRP to suit exactly what was achieved before. Now you can understand, I had a call, you know, during lunchtime, I get a WhatsApp because after 4 months, my wife is back at work. We've been working from home and I still do. And yeah, how's it going at home? No, it's okay. The dogs are okay. How's it going over there? Oh, no, we're manipulating the MRP again, you know. So, and you can imagine in the tobacco industry now, if there's all these rumors that things are going to change in the next couple of days. So they have this demand that they have to plan for what's out there. And stupid commodity, simple commodity, cigarettes, tobacco, different kinds of cigarettes, different flavors, different packets. It's not that complicated, but they manipulate the system exactly as you've just described it. I heard that again today.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people don't believe their systems either. And that's why we end up with bunches of spreadsheets trying to determine what to make and what to buy. Yeah, but I mean, the tobacco industry is going to be a problem. You can't take your history now because you haven't been selling anything. It's a zero. So you've got to use some sort of forecast technique to get you out into the future now.
Exactly.
But I just wonder if the legal tobacco industry is going to get back to where it was before, because I think the illegal one has taken over tremendously. And if they're not stupid, they're going to lower the prices lower than the legal one, and nobody's going to be buying legal cigarettes anymore. They're going to carry on buying the illegal ones. So, you know,